Welcome to the Sports Philanthropy Podcast. I'm your host, Roy Kessel, and we're very excited today to have with us Steve Riach. Steve is the CEO of the One Heart Project that provides a second chance for justice-involved youth. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Roy. Good to talk to you.
I appreciate you being here. I know you're doing some great work, and I look forward to hearing more about it. I thought it would be useful for our listeners to get a little bit of a background about you and the other work you've done before you got into this project.
Yeah, most of my professional career has been split really in two areas. One is in sports media, so filmmaking, documentary, television, radio, books, and really just any opportunity to tell great stories and tell them well. And then on the nonprofit side, this nonprofit's been in existence for over 20 years. We've really focused our attention on underserved youth around the country. And so I've just had such an incredible opportunity to do two things I really love. One, creating content, and the other, having my hand in an organization that has an impact on the lives of kids. I'm just really blessed.
So when you talk about the sports media and the filmmaking and storytelling, give us an example of some of the work that you've done in that space.
So we've done documentary films with the NFL, with the NBA, with NASCAR, the PGA, worked on a project that was an Amazon project on the University of Michigan football team, a 24/7 behind the scenes look. We're in production on a couple of films right now, both feature films and documentaries, and just again looking for opportunities to find great stories and hopefully tell them very well, and give audiences a chance to know more beyond what the surface story is and go deep into the lives of these people and the fascinating stories that they tell. We have been really honored to produce an event at the Super Bowl every year called the Bart Starr Award, where an individual who is selected by his peers in the NFL as the greatest example of character and leadership in the league, and of course named after the late Hall of Fame quarterback from the Green Bay Packers. It's another wonderful event around character and virtue that we have the opportunity to be part of.
Yeah, that's the Super Bowl breakfast that was honoring Eli this year.
Yeah, it was really fun this year to have Eli and Peyton together, and they became the first brothers ever to win the award. Of course, they became the first brothers to do a lot of things during their NFL career, but great to have the whole Manning family there and work with them. It's been that award has really been a fantastic piece in the NFL. You know, the names of those who won that award over the years: Steve Riach, Mike Singletary, Anthony Munoz, Reggie White, Darryl Green. I mean, you go on and on and on from the early beginnings all the way to some of the current players like Eli and Peyton and Drew Brees. Just really a who's who of the NFL. It's been such a privilege to work with those folks.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about that, because we had a chance to be at that breakfast this year. We've done a lot of work with Darren Gray and all of his groups, and the turnout was really amazing this year when you look at how many people were there, and we had a bit of an opportunity to sit down with Warrick Dunn after he came off the stage from his presentation, and just hearing how humble he is in the great work that he's done to build these houses for single mothers and everything. There's just so many amazing stories that are out there, and it's great that some of them are being told. I always feel that not enough of them are being told, because if you look at what goes on in the sports world, we've kind of got to that space where it's kind of the 24/7 talking head sports shows critiquing and microanalyzing whether the person breathed in when they should have breathed out while they were running that pattern, or what's going on. And there's far too little attention given to the types of stories you're talking about, which is really one of the principles behind the Sports Philanthropy Network, of being able to provide a forum and a ongoing platform to do that. You look at what's going on now with the COVID-19 pandemic and crisis and everything. And I guess for me, I find it a little bit disappointing. They've shut down a lot of those shows, but instead of putting on or creating some fresh content and really telling some of these stories that have impact, they're kind of throwing back greatest hits, highlights, and regurgitations of other events, which I understand are obviously less expensive because they don't need to be reproduced in the same way. We can maybe splice and package them a little bit more efficiently. But there's so many great stories that are out there. If you just follow along what's going on in the news now, and how many athletes are really stepping up to the table, and how many organizations are doing great work to take care of their workers, people in their communities during these challenges. I always say there's more stories than we have time to tell, and yet even in that scope, very few of the stories actually get told.
Yeah, it's the banner behind you, right, says it all. Using sports for social good and social change, and there is so much social good and social change that's occurring through the lives of these men and women who right now aren't participating because of the virus. And we don't hear those stories anymore. It's interesting, in the day I grew up, sports, the landscape of sports has changed so much in terms of what stories were told. And I think the advent of ESPN was so great for many of us because we could see games all the time, every day, every night. But it also created this image of the athlete that was a highlight reel only, really. And we lost some of our understanding of who these people are and what they do and what they stand for, and what they do when they're off the field. And as you said, this is a perfect time for it. I mean, here where I'm based in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we've had a number of athletes who have been taking opportunity during the time while games are down and stadiums are shut down to impact the community, particularly those that are really vulnerable right now. But what a wonderful opportunity this would be for sports networks to be able to share and profile those stories rather than running games from 10 years ago. So I agree with you. And I think that's really what we want to do. What we've been doing over the years is trying to highlight those stories, men and women of really great character in the world of sports, and how they're making an impact in their families and in the community, and the stories that most of us don't know about. And really, I think those translate well to feature film, and that's what we're doing on the documentary side and the feature film side as well, is finding those great stories and developing them so audiences can be inspired and moved to take a look at their own lives and see how they might be able to find deeper meaning as well.
I think you touched on exactly the point, which is you talked about them being great people. And I think that oftentimes as fans, we forget that they are people as opposed to just an athlete. In other words, their entire life, even though much of their image and identity and life is revolving around sports, they're still, many of them, very interesting people with a lot of great interests and passions, incredible stories that drew them and got them to the point that they are. And when you have a chance to listen to those, one of the things I always find most fascinating each year is the Hall of Fame, the NFL Hall of Fame speeches, when you get a chance to really hear what was behind the accomplishments, or what was that turning point for that individual athlete in their life. And many times it's just one person that they interacted with somewhere along the way, usually middle school or high school, that kind of proverbially pulled them up by the back of their collar and said, hey, you're going the wrong way, or you need to try harder, or you've got a lot of talent, we need some more effort. uh, it's interesting to hear how close so many of those individuals were to failing, to going down the wrong direction. And we only see the success, right? If they're going into Canton, they've achieved incredible success. And yet we don't realize how hard that battle was. And those stories exist at every level of sport, in every sport. And I love seeing those types of stories told.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there, what I think we know is that those types of stories have impact for us because there are learning opportunities for us as individuals through the lives of someone else's struggle and their what their learning was going through that struggle to get beyond it, and how they persevered. And I think there are greater cultural applications as well. And I'll give you an example. We're working on a film right now on the 1972 USC football team, University of Southern California football team, which many regard as the greatest team in the history of college football, if not the greatest, at least in the top, excuse me, 3 or 4 all time. And what most people see as just an undefeated season, 34 players going to play professional football from that roster, beating every opponent by 20 plus points, just a remarkable season on paper. But there's a dramatic story behind that in the early 1970s about race relations, which were not, let's say, everything wasn't copacetic necessarily back in the early 70s. And so there's this beautiful story about this team becoming unified, black and white, for a greater purpose, and then developing the bonds of friendship that would not only lead to what occurred on the field, but now have an enduring love between these guys almost 50 years later, which is a story that we need to hear today. We're in a time where we still haven't figured out the solution to our race issues, and this is a wonderful example of a large group of large guys who were able to put those differences aside and really understand who that other person was, what they walked through, what they've lived through, and gain a sense of empathy and compassion for one another to propel them forward. So stories like that, I think, they have greater meaning for us as a culture too, and I think can help us find our way. And so, those are the stories we love telling.
Well, I think when you talk about struggle and race relations, that's probably a perfect transition point to talk a little bit about the One Heart Project and how you came to get involved with this.
Yeah, so it started, Roy, with we had been doing this work on the nonprofit side for over 10 years at the time, working with kids in underserved areas around the country, mostly in public schools and in after-school outlets. And then we had been asked to start working with youth that were in juvenile correctional facilities. And at the same time, I had been looking for a story to tell as a feature film, and happened to be at a high school football game that took place back in 2008 between a private school in the Dallas area and a team from a maximum security juvenile facility. And the events that occurred that night were remarkable. It was written about by Rick Riley for ESPN. He called it the oddest high school football game in history. And it really had to do with the community around the private school in the Dallas area, reaching out to the kids from the juvenile facility and demonstrating compassion for them, unconditional compassion, and really saying to them, hey, you're just as important as anybody else on the face of the earth, becoming their fans, sitting on their side of the field and cheering for them by name and holding posters and signs up for these kids and making a spirit line for them to run through. It's a testament to the coach at the school, Grapevine Faith, by the name of Chris Hogan, who really came up with it was really on his heart to reach these kids who he knew never had fans in the stands and to become their fans for a night. And so sitting at that game and watching that, I really felt like we had the story that we could tell as a feature film, kind of a cross between The Blind Side and Remember the Titans. And so in developing that story, I went to the Gainesville facility and talked to the kids who participated in that game, who were locked up in a maximum security facility among the most violent teen offenders in the state of Texas, and began to hear their stories. And really, Roy heard the abject despair and hopelessness that existed in their lives. And it was at that point in learning about these kids' lives and their experiences and seeing that there was very little future for them that we felt like something very dynamic occurred, and that was that not only did we have the opportunity to tell this story as a feature film, but there was something based on what we had done on the nonprofit side that in working with underserved youth, that we really felt like we could do something to have an impact on the lives of these kids. And that's really how the One Heart Project was born.
Well, and it's interesting because even though some of these issues are getting a lot of attention and a lot of conversation, I still think that most of the people out there don't understand what goes on in these facilities and what the day-to-day life is like. They'll see some clips on a TV show. Maybe they'll see even a whole TV show like Orange is the New Black that's kind of dedicated to sort of what's supposed to be life behind the scenes of what goes on. But obviously, as someone that's been around that, I think you know that those depictions are not necessarily truly indicative of what that day-to-day life is like, and the despair and the boredom and the frustration and everything that are inherent in the system.
Yeah, they aren't what life is really like. And, they make for great drama, but life really is very challenging for these kids. Challenging is a tame word for it. Kids that are in the system, I think the misperception of the public typically, and it's just because we don't know, we don't have hands-on contact with these kids, but I think we tend to think that these kids that are in the juvenile justice system are all really bad kids, are getting what they deserve, and I'm glad they don't live in my neighborhood or hang out with my daughter, And the reality is far from that. These kids come from unimaginable backgrounds, the vast majority of them. Really dysfunctional families. It's like one of the youth said to us, I was born into crime. I was born into poverty. I was born into a broken home. They really, most of them have not had a first chance. When we talk about giving them a second chance, the reality is most of them really never got a first chance. But I think what we've learned over the years is that the majority of these kids are really good kids. They just need a little bit of support around them. And if we can build a healthy relationship network around them and give them the opportunity to acquire the tools and skills that are necessary to navigate life, and help them with some assistance on how to use those tools and skills, most of them are just doing great. They really are. And they just need a chance. They just need to know there's hope and that somebody cares about them.
And the concept of hope is something that people, I think, lose track of as they go through this analysis of what's going on. As you talked about the kids that are born into this life of crime or born into this life of poverty, the numbers are staggering when you look at how many of the kids that are in the juvenile justice system grew up in homes where in many cases, there did not have both parents. Certainly, oftentimes, probably more often, it's the father. Significant percentage of that time is that there had been either direct violence within the household, whether it had been the father is incarcerated or certainly other family members are incarcerated. And so the concept of being part of the system doesn't phase them per se, because that's what they've known. And when you talk to a lot of people, like when you're out there on a business level networking and meeting people, right, the conversations come down to, okay, where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Where'd you go to college? Right? What else have you been doing? And that's how you form connections. And if you talk to people that have been in the system, right, a lot of them are like, well, my uncle served with your brother or your dad's brother over here, and they're making connections based on who served in what facilities. And as you said, the willingness many people have to classify all of these individuals, all these young individuals, as troublemakers or bad kids is sad and shocking if you really think about it, because many times they're in these facilities relating to drug offenses or relating to other things that are not, as you said, not violent crimes. And certainly there are some that are for those reasons, but many of them are engaging in activities that are the same that kids, at a high school here in suburban Chicago or at college campuses and fraternities every weekend. The amount of drugs that are going through those areas are probably equally in existence. And yet the individuals coming out of the suburban high schools or the college campuses are not being imprisoned. They're not being put into those juvenile facilities for really the exact same type of conduct.
Yeah, it is true, and some of the kids that we've talked with over the last few years, their activities as 15-year-olds were no different than my activities as a 15-year-old. That I just didn't get caught, right? Or I wasn't in the same neighborhood to get caught. And so there are systemic issues that really, I think, there are many other organizations that are working with us to try and address as well. But I think, what this has to come down to, Roy, too, is that we have to take statistics out of this equation. And what I mean by that is, these are kids, these are human beings who came into this world with a purpose to fulfill, and they really just need someone to come alongside of them and demonstrate that they care and to give them some help. And I'll give you an example. One of the first young men we worked with when we launched this back in 2009, I said, "Tell me your story." And he said, "Well, my mom was a crack addict and my dad was a player." And he said, "So when my sister was 8 years old, and I was 9, I was the one raising myself and her. And really no parents in the home to speak of." He said, "I witnessed my first murder when I was 12. My best friend and I," he was 13, "we were playing 2-on-2 basketball on the playground. We played against two 18-year-olds and we beat them. And we're excited. We're 12 and 13. We just beat two 18-year-olds. We didn't know they were gang members, and one of them got mad that we were celebrating, reached into his duffel bag, pulled out a gun, and shot my friend in the head right there." He said, "I thought I was next, but they turned and ran." And he said, "But my best friend bled out on my lap on the playground." No 12-year-old should have to witness that. And and then began to share the story of being taken out of that home when Child Protective Services found out the two kids were by themselves. And that began a journey of in and out of different foster homes over the next 4 years, 7 different foster homes. And he said, by the time I was 15, I decided I've had enough of this, and I went out on the street on my own. Now here he is, 15 years old, no criminal intent, no criminal background, but he's living in abandoned cars and abandoned buildings. And And now he's out on the street and he has nothing to eat. And so he said, I robbed these two people. I knew what I did was wrong, but I didn't know how else I was going to get food. And that story is, or the elements of, are so common for the kids that we come in contact with. And what we have found is that, if there's just a little hope and a little opportunity, it goes a long way. We had a young man who came out and got hired by a law firm. And, because of his record, there were only certain things, certain places he could go in that law firm, but he took the bus an hour every day to get to the law firm, to get to work, and was on time every single day. Spent years at that law firm, saved up all the money that he was making, lived frugally, and had enough money to buy a truck. He said, my dream as a kid was always to drive a truck. So he bought a truck and started driving a truck. He saved up his money from that first truck and he bought a second truck, and now he's got his own little trucking company. I mean, the stories are, I could tell you many stories of the kids we've seen. I think what we realize is that probably best summed up, we had one of our mentors going down for his first visit to be with a young man. And he said, he told me afterwards, he said, Steve, while I was walking in, I was bracing myself emotionally that I might have a physical confrontation with this kid, right? You don't know, right? We're ignorant until we actually come face to face. And he said, so I'm preparing myself for how I'm going to deal with this physical altercation. He said, once I got in the room and sat down across the table from him, I realized I was talking to somebody who was just like my own son. And so he said, what do you like to do? And the boy said, I like to play board games. And they went and got a board game out of the prison library, and they played a board game together. And he said, he told me this afterwards, of course, again, he said, I noticed that while we were playing the game that it looked like the boy was cheating. And he said he thought, oh no, now I'm going to have to confront him about cheating on our first meeting. And so he also realized that he was watching the game continuing. He said it looked like he wasn't cheating very well because I ended up winning the game. And so he said he confronted him afterwards. He said, Gage, it looked like when we were playing the game that you were cheating. He said, Gage dropped his head and said, yes, sir, I'm sorry. He said, but the thing I can't figure out is you must not be a very good cheater because I won the game. Or were you trying to cheat so that I could win? And he said, the boy looked at him and said, I wanted you to come back. And he thought if he just let him win, that the mentor would come back. I mean, that's really what I think epitomizes so many of these kids is they just are so hungry for a good relationship because they've had so few in their lives that are either positive or healthy or actually last. Most of the people that they care about end up abandoning them. So I think what we've learned is that if we can surround them with healthy, positive relationships and then put the tools in their hands, the opportunity for success is just as great as any of our kids.
Well, you've raised a lot of interesting issues there in terms of healthy, positive relationships. And I think it just speaks to the fact of how many breakdowns there are along the way in the system. So the easy one that most people will point out is what goes on at home, right? The situation that they started in. But then as you talk about what, the situation at home leads the kids to have to raise each other, leads the kid to moving out and being on the street, leads to having to steal to get food or leave a foster home. And it's sad that there is so much need for these kids to have to take those steps, that given the amount of resources that exist in this country that are available, that a kid should have to feel that his only alternative to starvation is that he's got to go and rob people, because the kid hasn't been trained. The kid doesn't understand where to go and make that call and say, hey, I'm hungry. I don't have anywhere to live. I don't have anywhere to sleep. Many of these kids would love, as you said, and you gave some great examples of being given the opportunity to work, whether it's at a law firm, even with the restrictions that you're talking about. buying a truck or having a mentor that's going to give them that positive interaction. It all comes back to that concept you brought up at the beginning of hope, of how do we give them the feeling that you are a valuable member of our society, you have innate worth, right? We're not just throwing you into a justice system or a juvenile justice system where your hope is now going to evaporate because frankly, you're not being put into a very good environment. You're likely to come out worse having
Yeah,
been in that environment instead of better.
that's so true. And, a quick example is when we first began this process, I had an NFL player come to me and he said, we've been very grateful at some of the NFL players and coaches who've gotten involved. And I think because it ties back to the football game, it became a kind of a natural connection for them. But he came to me and he said, my younger brother's in prison and he's serving a 99-year sentence. And he said, I've learned some things from him. He said, one of the things I learned is that unless he has a commissary account inside the prison, he doesn't have access to personal hygiene items. So that inspired some members of our team who said, hey, we can do something about that. And we created this thing called the fan bag. And the fan bag is just a 2-gallon Ziploc bag that has deodorant, body wash, shampoo, a knit hat and gloves for kids when they get cold in the winter. And it gets distributed to kids inside the prison facilities that we work with. And you think about kids just feeling normal or feeling like they're human or that they have value, just to be able to smell good or to be able to have toothpaste or mouthwash so my breath doesn't stink, or those kinds of things that we all take for granted, but they allow those young men and young women to feel like they're human. And I think there are simple ways for us to do that. Life on life connection is the most important. So we love when we have people that actually go deliver those fan bags face to face. We love obviously our mentors who are face to face with these kids, life on life. And I think the other thing too that provides value is letting them know that they can get a job, and there are ways to get jobs, and they can be on a career path once they come out of prison. And so, I'll give you an example. We know that right now, even though the unemployment rate prior to the virus was very low in the United States, we also know that construction, manufacturing, and hospitality, for example, are 3 industries that are hurting for labor right now. And so major metropolitan areas around the United States dramatically short on construction workers. As many as 200,000 in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, 100,000 in Kansas City, 80,000 in Salt Lake City. The manufacturing area, 2.5 million jobs over the next 10 years in the United States. So these kids, for the kids that we're working with that might not get the chance at the law firm or to buy their own truck, there are opportunities for employment and career paths with partners that we have in construction, manufacturing, and the hospitality industries that are not just minimum wage jobs, but these are jobs that actually can pay them very well and can put them on a career path to have a long and extended career. And so one of the things we've done, for example, is we've worked with the Builders Association in Salt Lake City, where 80,000 workers short. They came in and they went into the prison facility as a partner of ours and began training the kids inside that we were working with inside the juvenile facilities to become framers. And so they had all their classroom sessions to learn to frame, and then they had hands-on working with power tools and everything inside the prison and building doll houses so that they could become certified while they're in prison. And then one of those companies that make up the Builders Association hires them upon release. So they walk immediately into a well-paying job. And I think it's the combination of all that, the opportunity and the care, and not just going in and saying, hey, we care about you, but I'm not coming back next week or next month. but we're going to we're going to walk alongside you through this whole process and help you along the pathway, as there's a pathway built for you to walk towards some semblance of normalcy and successful living. And I think with that and the healthy relationships and them seeing that there are people that are not going to leave them, but are going to maintain relationships with them over the long term, really gives an opportunity for us to see these kids have success. I mean, it's same way we do with our own children. You and I, we walk with our kids for the rest of their lives, and these kids need the same.
So tell us a little bit more about how people can help support your initiative, how they can get involved, mentoring with you, what that process looks like.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So we do need we need people who know how to teach and deliver content. We've got curricular training we do with for social and emotional intelligence. So these might be corporate trainers or school teachers or Sunday school teachers, anybody who's got experience teaching or training. We need volunteers for that. We need mentors who would be willing, Roy, just to give up 1 hour a week to meet with one of these kids and develop a relationship and have an impact on their lives. And volunteers who can teach financial literacy or life skills or provide transportation. The needs are significant. So really anyone like that can participate as, of course, anybody wants to help financially, we love that as well. But these kids just need people. And the more people we can surround them with, we'd love for them to participate. So people can just go to our website. It's oneheart.com. It's very simple. And there's an engage button. And once they hit that engage button, it gives them opportunities to connect with us and tell us what they'd like to do to help one of these youth.
Well, it sounds like you've got an incredible system that's been put together over this time and the impact. Tell us about the geographic scope in terms of where people need to be and how they can get to you in terms of what areas geographically you need help on.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So we are operating right now in 5 states. We're in Texas, Kansas, Missouri, Utah, and Indiana. Moving into Nebraska as soon as the COVID-19 virus lifts. Moving into Oklahoma, moving into Virginia. And really, I would say that if there are some motivated people out there that are in states other than those that I've mentioned, it's not difficult for us to launch in new areas. We're moving as fast as we can to try and impact as many kids as possible. And we just need more partners out there, more people who are willing to make a difference in the lives of kids. So if we've got people listening in Chicago or in New York or Miami or wherever they are, we can work in those areas, and it's worth us having a conversation with those folks.
Well, that's great. I think that this is an area that we should be able to find people that want to participate in and help just in the concept of the mentoring. Certainly a lot of people that are affiliated with our network have experience in the teaching or training types of areas, coaching. And I think that those are spaces that would be great fits to assist you. So I encourage all of our listeners to take a look at the oneheart.com website and see how you can fit in. And as Steve said, if you're in those states, they probably got things you can do right now. With Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Virginia coming online soon, then certainly that's a good time to get involved and be Absolutely. In from the beginning. And on top of that, if you're in other areas, let's have the conversation and let's see what we can do to get people involved that can help implement this, because it's got such a meaningful long-term impact in those communities to and this is sort of my closing pitch as I hear everything you've described, is the impact is not just on those kids. The impact is truly on the whole community, because as kids coming out of those communities are given hope, that really impacts how everybody around them looks at what's going on. And then some of the younger kids coming up through the system, some of the other families that are there can look at what has happened and the support that these kids have received and recognize that that's great. Now let's try and back up the intervention so we don't only start working with them when they've been through the system. Let's see what we can do to keep them out of the system entirely.
Yeah.
And so I give you a lot of credit for everything that you guys have done, and really appreciate your time coming on with us today. And just want to thank you for all the great work that you do.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Roy. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and appreciate you making people aware of what we're doing, and would love to work with any of your great audience in the areas they're in. So thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you, Steve. This is Roy Kessel signing off for the Sports Philanthropy Podcast. Hope you'll join us next time, and some more interesting topics coming up. Thanks for joining us.